So good day. Before Rosh Hashanah, we learned days 3 and 4 of Igeres HaKodesh. Today we're learning 4 and 5 together because today is the 5th. But before we start, I'd like an opportunity to remind us that Gadol Torah Amevi Refuah L'chol Bria, greatest Torah because it gives healing to all creation. So I'd like to wish a refuah shlema to Rav Yitzhak Feivish ben Braina Malka, Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, and to Orach ben Yomin ben Rachel Blima for a refuah shlema bekorev mamish. Today's a Yom Yom. Today's a Yom Yom. We recall that we are exploring the acronym of Shuva that was invented by Rav Zushya. He explained the Shin today on the 5 of Tishrei. So a resume, the Shin of Shuva, Tashuv to Shin. The Shin stands for Shavisi. I have set God, Shavisi, I have set God before me always. This name Havaya, which is the name of God he uses here, indicates the creation of the universe and creatures, as we will learn as we explore the Seder of creation in Likutei Amorim, in Likutei Amorim, but in particularly in Igeres HaKodesh. Bringing all of creation into being and sustaining it is accomplished by bridging an infinite gap from Ayin to Yesh. And that really is the subject of that we've been delving into in Igeres HaKodesh for the last few days. The creation, as they say, ex nihilo, out from nothing, which I always translate as no thing, no distinctiveness whatsoever, from an allness, which people like to use the word as ineffable and undefinable and undemarcatable. That ayin comes a yesh, which is just the opposite, demarcated, defined, etc., etc. So the Shin, bringing all creation into being and sustaining it, is accomplished by bridging this infinite gap from Ayin into Yesh. This form of Avoda, of I have set Havaya before me, that, in other words, in front of me is this process of Yesh, of Ayin coming into Yesh, results from one's constant awareness of the way in which the universe and all that is in it is constantly being brought into being. And this, by the way, is a major theme of Rosh Hashanah, which we just came out of. One of the reasons the Alter Rebbe explains it's called the Rosh, the head of the year, because just like the head is the starting point of all the nerve impulses that come into the body, and each time the head manifests an energy, this is an energy that has coming anew from the head into the body. So Rosh Hashanah is a totally new creation. Every Rosh Hashanah is a new head, a new beginning. So with that, let's turn to our Igeres HaKodesh. In Lessons in Tanya, this is on page 4, right? We're doing 4 and 5 today. So 4 of Tishrei is on page 379 in Lessons in Tanya. And in Likutei Amorim, it's on page 260. Down from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The line begins with Behislab Shusan. So I just want to give a bit of an introduction, since this whole area of Tanya, beginning with chapter 20, is couched in very esoteric Kabbalistic words. It begins in chapter 20 with an expression from the Zohar, which says, Ihu v'chayehi chad. He and his life force, which the Alter Rebbe is going to utilize as a metaphor for light, like light illuminates, so or energy empowers. So Chayuchi is the empowering energy of everything, the light, the energy of everything. The Zohar says, and this pertains to the world of Atzilus, the highest of the four worlds that we're used to dealing with. It says, he and that energy are one in the world of Atzilus, even though we're speaking about he and an energy, which is two. The sense in Atzilus is that Atzilus doesn't feel the separation. Atzilus feels united with the one with the emanated, that's the word of Atzilus, feels united with the emanator. And even more news, he and his kalim, vessels. So a vessel, we can use the mashal since we use the metaphor of light, like a light bulb, right? The energy is flowing, but the energy won't be manifest unless there's a vehicle which is appropriate, i.e. the light bulb, for manifesting that light. And at Atzilus, even the vessel, which is a container for the life force, are also one. And he is one bohen. He himself is one within both of them. So we open up with a subject that is our major topic here, the simultaneity of infinite and finite. The simultaneity, simultaneous is the noun, no, is the adjective, excuse me, is simultaneous. The ayin, which is the source of everything in an undifferentiated state, flows into, that's the undifferentiated light which is coming from him, flows into the vessel. And in Atzilus, there's a complete unity of those two things together. And that's how we began. And so what we're exploring here are various levels from which Atzmus, essence of God, manifests first light, and that first light is called a gilui, and one of the expressions of it is gilui min hahelam. It's a revelation from a more concealed level. The more concealed level is roughly equivalent to what we call the ayin, and we use a different construct, which we'll be using here most of the time, yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. In other words, particularity in which is invested in an infinite, indescribable entity of no definition whatsoever. That's the basic construct of what we'll be doing here. So this construct may be somewhat better understood by the mashal that he brings about the birth of an embryo into a baby. So the process begins with a seminal drop in the mind of the father. So let's just take the father for the moment. I mean, it's going to take a pair, obviously, but we'll take the father for the moment. Each of us, male or female, father or mother, every human has an essence, a core, which gets expressed by bubbling up to the surface. More and more bubbling up brings more and more realization, emanation, sense of definition. And in previous classes, I've used the mashal derived from that Sigmund Freud used, called the Freud's iceberg, in which an iceberg, of course, most of it is underneath the water, and it's just a little tip that's on the surface. So in roughly corresponding terms, we could say the deepest part, the biggest part, you don't see at all. It's the part before there's any emanation whatsoever. This is true of God. It's true of ourselves. In godly terms, we're calling it the ayin. That source of everything, which is in a complete state of hiddenness, in a complete state of undifferentiation, right? So this is, from there rises an emanation. We're calling it the Or Ein Sof. So you have the Ein Sof, the infinite, about whom we can say nothing. He's beyond limitation. He's beyond limitless. He contains both limitlessness and limitedness, because, as our sages have said, there There's no opposites there. He's the one who can he can carry opposites, because in this level there are no two things to be in opposition to each other. But as it comes into the surface, it begins to take a form. It rises, in Freudian terms, from the unconscious to the preconscious. It's still not in thought. And then it rises to the conscious, where we have consciousness of it. Consciousness doesn't necessarily have to be intellectual. The consciousness be an awareness, which can then transcend, then become something even more particularized, which is particular thoughts. So the notion that we have here on the table is an essence, undefinable, from which rises in layer after layer after layer a degree of various degrees of particularization. Okay, I think that's sufficient as an introduction. I guess one more point. Let's put this back in the realm of godliness and humanity. So from the time that this energy pushes its way upward, becomes more megala, more revealed, and finally it becomes lodged in the brain. So that's where the seminal drop metaphor comes into play. Now it's something particular, something that's going to come from the brain, and it's going to go down into the torso of the body, and then it's going to enter into an intimate relationship with the opening and which we call the zivug, the intimacy between man and woman. And there's a correspondence going on there in the woman, which is the departure and evolution and concretization of the egg, where the egg and sperm move together. And then it goes down and starts developing. So back to our metaphor, once the fertilization takes place, as I said, from this downward vector. The downward vector in the mind is from Chabad, Chokhmah, Bina, Das, and into then the 7 Midos, and then finally lodging into Malchus, which is the womb. And so that's the metaphor of conception. That's the metaphor which will ultimately give birth to birth. And similarly with Hashem, that metaphor applies from Chabad to the Midos to Malchus, and Malchus, which is the receiver, Malchus is the receiver, the womb in which creation gestates, particularizes, organizes until the whole creation is born. Okay. Amnam, page 260. Midoy Zeus, this is known. The main place, level, which takes place where there is something which we call something completely separate, Huma Malchus de Atzilus, is from Malchus of Atzilus, right? As the seminal drop merges with the egg, still a very rarefied, unspecified thing. When it becomes embedded in the womb and then goes through gestation, so that's when you start getting a separate thing, i.e., a new reality of a human called a baby. And similarly in worlds. At that stage, when everything drops down, gestates in Malchus, and then is born, what's born is worlds. And worlds are born from these distinct levels coming down from Malchus of Atzilus. Shenasa Atik de Bria, which Malchus of Atzilus becomes the crown of Bria. We haven't mentioned the crown yet. The crown, in all my masholim that I've been giving you here, we've been talking about the brain, everything starting here in the brain. The brain is an organ, a soft organ, but it's inside a skull, right? The skull encompasses the brain. So in the language of Kabbalah, the all-encompassing thing, which looks like nothing, but really is the touch point where Atzmus reaches an interface to the soft tissue of the brain, the skull, is called the crown. And the crown is called Atik. It's short for Atik Yomin, the Ancient of Days, which precedes It's a level. It's called the Ancient of Days, but it's a level in the devolution of the creation of reality from atzmus to concrete things. So Malchus is that place where that concretization starts, and Malchus, like a king and a queen, they wear a crown. So we'll talk about the crown as the proximate source of everything which is going to come from there. It's called Atik. And where the sense of separation first starts to really be tangibilized and felt is in the world called Bria. As I said earlier, Atzilus feels itself bound up with the Emanator. Bria, where there's more contraction, more tzimtzum, that's the operating word, more contraction, smallness, and particularization, doesn't feel that sense of separation. Kien melech b'le'am. But that's, so the crown of Malchus of Atzilus, which is the bottom of Atzilus, becomes the crown of Bria, as it says, Ein melech b'le'am. There's no regnancy, there's no kingship, there's no kingship and queenship without a people. Excuse me. The people implies that there's a bunch of differentiated stuff. And that's what Malchus is going to do. For Hashem to be king, he has to have a people, something which is differentiated and which is aware of him enough to be subservient, not a very good word, to be given over to him in a way that they will do his will. That's the people. And all the multiplicity of creations and all their divisions that are created with the power of the Ein Sof, right? So this power of Ein Sof has the power to create Ein Sof, infinite creations. So this power, while it's Yochid Umeyuchid Betachlis, while it's united with him, with God himself in an ultimate way completely, as it's united with him, but as it comes into more exposed or more external levels of God consciousness, it starts taking shape. And the shape is indicated by the Hebrew letters, as we've talked about before. The letters are the containers for the infinite light. And that's what, as we've spoken before, that's what makes the Torah unique amongst all documents. It isn't a document where the content is only the main thing. It's a document in which the process of that content and even down not just to the words and the sentences, but even the letters are there as a manifestation of godly energy in a particular shape. The most commonly, Yud, Ke, Vav, Ke. Yud is Chochmah. Yud is a small letter because it represents that touch point where the ayin just begins to flow into the yesh, and it's just a point. The He is expansion, and the expansionness of the letter He indicates the energy that's flowing into that letter. So these are the Ribo Oisias, the many letters, Hayotzis Memalchus, which come from Malchus. Malchus, in addition to being the womb, which gives forth a baby, is also like another orifice which gives forth, which is this one, the mouth. Because Malchus Peh. Malchus is the mouth, Torah Shebal Peh, and refers to the oral Torah. So Malchus is the Pi Havaya, is the mouth of God. And it's used in the expression from Tillim, with the breath of his mouth, he creates all of the hosts. The Hemotzotz Peh, now there's breath of the mouth. Now here we're in the mushal, right? We're down into nothing has come into a something, but it's just a yud. It needs to be expressed in multiple ways. So the first expression of it is just a simple breath, right? And then that simple breath goes through the 5 articulative powers of the mouth, right? The throat, the tongue, the uvula, the teeth, and the lips. And these are ways of restraining and also dividing, creating multiplicity. Therefore, They're called the five Gevuras of the feminine, which is Malchus. And here is where you first get the expression of revealed worlds. Everything else before that, Atzilus and on up, is progressing toward a discernible, differentiated world, which is the infinite world of Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, all the way down to Asiya Gashmius. That's called Alma Diskalia, the revealed worlds. Because in those worlds is revealed the power of the Or Ein Sof, not the raw Ein Sof, the essence himself, but essence as that essence has devolved into, if not devolved, has given over to exuding a ray. That first ray is called the Kav, the beam. And that beam divides up into many beams, back into the metaphor of light, many rays. And those rays have the power of the infinite within them, the power of infinite capabilities within them, to create yesh ma'ayin, to create something, meaning something tangible, discernible, from an ayin, which is that more close to essence space where there is nothing tangible or discernible. It's not coming in a step-by-step motion. It's coming in what's a decent metaphor, a quantum leap, where the reality of the ayin, which gives forth the yesh, is not, you can't trace it step by step by step. It's a quantum leap. There's no time, there's no space in between. So that's what it means, Shalei al yedei ilava alo. From there on down, from Chokhmah to Bina, to Das, to Chesed, etc., one thing bumps into the, touches the other and causes it to take on a certain characteristic. That characteristic, in turn, bumps into or touches something else, and that's called the chain of descent. Aval tes sefiros harishaynos. But the first 9 spheres, in other words, from Chokhmah to Yesod, not counting Malchus, Nestle b'histalshus ilabrolo, as I said, they come in histalshus, Chokhmah, Bina, Das, etc., in a cause and effect relationship. But the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, which is from the ayin, is an expression, Chokhmah me'ayin timotze, comes from the ayin, that's reserved for Chokhmah alone. It says in Sefer Yetzirah, that the beginning is wedged in the end, that the power of the Ein Sof, although as it comes down, it's no longer revealed as Ein Sof, we don't see the infinite, but the infinite power, even the power of Etzem, the very essence of things, is floating through, floating is not a good word, is in the oil of Aval, it's in a cause and effect, it's being transmitted through each and every level. The very beginning is transmitted to each and every level below it, although as you get levels below it, it's not so visible and tangible. Because the crown, right, there's the skull, you see above me there's nothing, not a bad metaphor, right? There's an ayin, then there's a keser, and then there's the brain. So this keser, humamutza, it's an intermediary, isn't it? Between the emanator, which you can't see at all because there's nothing particularized about him as yet, between the emanator, lehanat solim, to the emanated. So Chokhmah is that this keser is the intermediary between the ayin and the first instantiation, the first instant of yesh, which occurs for our purposes here in Tanya, in the world of Atzilus. And it has within it, this is the notion of how the infinite comes down, it has a touch, I'm using that word, a touch, it has a little bit, a category of the underside or the backside, the lower side, if you're using this hierarchical structure, ayin, right, touches keser, touches brain, and in there, in that flow, chokhmah me'ayin timotzi, it takes a little bit of that ayin and it starts coming down, the ayin being the infinite. Therefore, it's called the crown of the king, because who has a king? Who has a crown? A king. V'gam ki bechinas acharena, and also because the last level, the lower level of the Ein Sof, is Malchus. It's called Malchus to Ein Sof, Malchus of the infinite, which will, of course, will give rise to Atzilus with its own Malchus, right, recapitulated, which will become the crown of Bria, and etc., down to Yetzirah and Asiyah. So Malchus of the Ein Sof touches into the Kesser, Malchus of the Ein Sof touches into the Kesser of the world of Atzilus. V'lachein gama Malchus Atzilus nikra Kesser. And therefore, since this structure recapitulates, so Malchus of Atzilus, the bottom, but its kingship, which means crown, becomes the crown of that which is below it. Omagam, and especially, Kibris Hanashamas Memenu, especially through this is how souls become created. Lies Yesh V'Dov, how souls become separated. My soul, your soul, from, like everything else, from an allness and a nothingness, right? Getting to feel now the nothingness, which is the everythingness. And that's how souls become separated, bifnei atzma, each on its own, be'olam habriya, in the world of Bria, v'nikra b'shem leda. And when the souls become differentiated, right? So then, back to our mashal of conception and birth, that's called birth. Before that, just like birth, everything is hidden inside the woman, inside the womb. Everything is hidden. Lots going on. Going back to the infusion of the seminal, the zygote, the egg, the seminal drop, back. But if you're going down, the culmination of this process, just as in a human woman, is birth. So also in the structure up above of the human being up above, that worlds first come into existence, olam habriya, and that's called birth. And that's symbolized down here below, and one of the main reasons that we're going to remember Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt, because our going out of Egypt happened with the breaking of the waters, right? The waters parted, right? So this is called birth. B'kriyas Yamsu, and the sea split. And when that sea split down here below, that represents the split, the opening, the birth up in Atika, up in Atik Yomin, the highest levels of godliness, right? We are created in his image. So the birth down here below is an image of God giving birth to particularity, to new things, worlds up above. Begam kol gidel hanashomas kol zayin hadoshim, and also the growth of a neshama, all 7 months while it's in the womb, mizivik shel Shemini Atzeres, from the conception which took place on Shemini Atzeres. Interesting thing in itself, right? 7 months from Shemini Atzeres to Kriyas Yamsuf. So if you work from Kriyas Yamsuf, that's when the birth takes place. The conception took place on Shemini Atzeres. Ad Shvi Shel Pesach, which goes and evolves, develops in the spiritual womb, just like in the human womb, until Pesach, when the waters break. Just like the growth of the Midos and Malchus, from that conception of Midos and Malchus, in the womb of the mother. And here we're speaking about the supernal mother, which corresponds to the physical mother, the supernal Malchus. This is all about the supernality of the woman, the supernal, the supernal, high, responsible for all of the creation and creating the particularization of everything, which is the faculty and the gift of womanhood. And that's true up above, and it's true in the image of God down below, down below. And the Ema Allah, the supernal mother, Shehu Al Yedei Oidus El Yonim, that happens through a flow, but it's flow of what's called supernal light. Oidus El Yonim, high lights, Ema Allah, from the supernal mother, which is the Malchus of Ein Sof, before even Malchus of Atzilus. Ulamai Lamala, and this goes up, 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 this level of, if we come down, like Malchus of Asiya is given birth to from the Keser of Asiya, which is formed from Malchus of Yetzirah. I'm going up in worlds, and that recapitulates upward up to Atzilus, and then higher and higher and higher until ad infinitum, right? And with this flip from nothing to something, something to nothing, right? Goes on and on and on, upward, 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 or downward, 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 however way you want to look at it. And this results at any level that you're looking at in a birth of a new level, which will be a predecessor if you're coming down to another level. And this takes Zion, Tes or Zion Yachileda. And these are the 9 or 7 months of birth down here below in a human pregnancy and birth. Similarly is the process of the creation of souls and angels, la'olam habriya, from the world of Atzilus to Bria. V'gam kol ikar v'shoros hatipa shemakabelet u'misaveres mezor. And this is the entirety of the process, and this is the root of the process of the seminal drop, which is received and which passes through from Zoh, from the 6 midos, into Malchus. And that seminal drop starts in the Hamoichin, and the egg itself, in the Moichin, the seminal drop in the egg, in the brain of the Abba Va'ima, in the mother and father. Down here below and up above. Mother and father, Chochmah and Bina, right? And you can go even higher than that into the realms of levels in Keser, where these things are occurring also. But the incredible thing, I think, and the thing that touches me at the moment is how everything in this world, and we're using the example of gestation and birth, everything in this world is an example of, or an instance of, the actual union of ayin and yesh and ayin. The ayin uniting with or giving birth to, right? Birth has that also function that you don't see anything, right, until it slides down the channel and comes out. But you know there's something there. So imagine having that attitude toward everything, that what you see must have a predecessor, something which is there, responsible for it. And if you work your way through your head back to what we've been talking about, that predecessor is Atzmus, or is the Atzmus of the Ein Sof, the essence of God, which beams out the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, which then gets more contracted and more particularized until it comes all the way down. The beginning is wedged in the end to everything that exists down here on planet Earth as a container of the Ein Sof itself and the Or Ein Sof. Ubechol zivug, and in every intimate union, Yimshechas, the Ava Va'ima, the Arich Anpin, is drawn down to the mother and the father, and passes through Arich Anpin. We have levels in the crown. Atik Yomim is the top, Arich Anpin is lower, and then it goes down. Al Yedei, and it goes from Arich Anpin, which is the lower level, to Atik Yomim, which is the higher level. And this lower and higher level, even in the crown, goes higher and higher and higher, ad Ein Sof, until you get to the place. Well, first of all, there's no end to this. It's infinite, up and up and up, layer after layer after level, layer, and down and down and down. Yesh me'ayin, and also Seder Histalshalis, coming down from Chachma into the Midos and into Malchus. This pattern goes on, infinitely high and infinitely low. Ad Ein Sof. Raksha kol behelim, but it's all taking place in a concealed way. Behelim, b'moichin, in the brain, or in the womb, ad ledes hanukva, and until ledes hanukva until the birth, which the woman gives forth, the birth of neshamas or malachim. Now we're speaking about here on the godly, spiritual plane, the birth of souls and the birth of angels, the hacholis, and the birth of all the chambers and places. The whole entirety of place becomes created. There's place in Atzilus, and there's place on planet Earth. Time, place, and soul, all created from that same ayin, that same nothing, as it comes yesh, and then through Seder Histalshuas, and comes down to all, for the angels, the souls and angels, into Olam Abriya. So Nimsa, it comes out, Shezehu Gili Or Ein Sof Mamish Al Yedei HaIbar V'Halev. This is the revelation of the Or Ein Sof through the process of Ibor, which is pregnancy, development, and birth. All right, I'm going to stop here. This takes us to Yom He, which is today, Yom He, and tomorrow is Yom Vav. And the Mirza Hashem will continue tomorrow and try to do 2 days, He and Vav. Vav, of course, being the pictogram for this whole Indian from top to bottom, and Vav Tishrei, of course, being the birthday of Rebbe Simchana, and the whole sphere of Malchus, the feminine. We'll talk about this tomorrow, and Mirza Hashem. We'll see you then. Good night. Good day.